Hello miners, head of R&D here. So, we have one last class to cover in the briefing, that being Driller. Driller, whose name might allude to one thing, is surprisingly versatile as a class. As a Driller, you can either become the best support class for your team, or you can go full on one dwarf army, with almost everything in your equipment being effective weapons. Ideally, you should find a good middle ground between the two extremes. Now, let us talk about your arsenal as a Driller. The first primary weapon is the Crisper Flamethrower. As the name mentions, it's a bog standard flamethrower. Hold the trigger to spray forth a stream of high pressure flame. Enemies in this flame will be rapidly burnt and reduced to smouldering ash. The flamethrower also works surprisingly well against larger enemies. This weapon has the ability to set the terrain around you on fire. Enemies that walk through the flames will quickly ignite and take plenty of damage. Ground fire is better used against smaller enemies, as it will kill them quicker. The next primary weapon is the Cryo Cannon, a portable freezing device. Hold the trigger to charge it and quickly release a spray of high pressure freezing ice. As the name implies, spraying this weapon at enemies will rapidly cool them, and when they get cold enough, freeze solid. Enemies that are frozen take more damage, which is useful as this weapon has extremely low damage. Be wary too that certain enemies have a Cryo Rage ability, making them move a lot faster when under the influence of cold. Just like the flamethrower, the Cryo Cannon can place freezing ice onto surfaces. Any enemies that walk over this ground ice will quickly freeze. Be mindful that unlike ground fire, ground ice will not kill enemies. The final primary weapon is the corrosive Sludge Pump. This homebrew toxic goo launcher fires blobs of horrible toxic waste. The weapon deals surprisingly lethal amounts of damage and will quickly melt away smaller enemies. Toxic goo blobs are also capable of dealing large amounts of damage to larger enemies quickly, melting them down too. A unique ability the Sludge Pump has is by holding the fire button, you can create a charged goo ball. Charged goo balls deal more damage and fragment into smaller blobs on impact, further increasing damage and crowd control power. Just like the other two weapons, the Sludge Pump can coat surfaces with nasty corrosive chemicals. Enemies that walk through these corrosive puddles will take plenty of damage and eventually dissolve into the puddles. This weapon is fantastic when you feel like doing the extra dirty work. Now, before we talk about your secondaries, let's talk about your two special equipment pieces. The Satchel Charge, more commonly known as the C4, is one of a driller's main tools. While mostly used to blow open huge holes in terrain or accidental homicide of your teammates, it's surprisingly effective at exploding enemies. One pack will kill a lot of enemies in a wide range. As well as this, the concussive force will quickly stall and stagger huge groups of larger enemies. However, as a rule of thumb, not even the C4 will save you when it comes to fighting against the largest enemies of Hoxies. Do not use these on the huge enemies, unless you can genuinely finish them off with a press of a button. Next is the reinforced power drills. These drill gauntlets are primarily used to dig tunnels and paths for you and your team. However, they're also surprisingly potent weapons in close combat. The extremely powerful spinning drill heads will brutally grind most enemies into paste in a few seconds. As well, the loud noise of the drills will scare away most enemies that get hit by them. The drills are especially powerful against medium and larger enemies, as the drills will be able to prevent them from attacking you. They make for incredible self-defense weapons, for when the odds demand their use. Alright, now we can get to the secondary weapons. The first secondary weapon is the Subata 120 pistol, a normal company issue sidearm. There really isn't too much to say about it. The low damage means it's rather ineffective against most enemies, but it's accurate enough to hit weak points reliably. When you factor in the realization that your primaries cannot do weak point damage, the pistol gets a bit more merit. The next secondary is the experimental plasma charger, a very fascinating piece of technology. This bulky pistol fires high-power plasma projectiles at a rather steady pace. This pistol is surprisingly efficient in close combat against small enemies, thanks to the higher damage the projectiles offer. When you feel like fetching extra punch, holding the fire button will charge up a more powerful shot. This charged shot deals more damage and explodes with some force, killing small enemies very quickly. Not a bad sidearm, but when you want to deal some hurt. The final secondary weapon is the Colette Wave Cooker. Yes, that is indeed a weaponized microwave strapped to your arm. Holding the trigger will create a beam of microwave radiation. Enemies caught in this radiation beam will be cooked alive. How gruesome. Be cautious, as radioactive glyphids in the radiation zone biome will prove much tougher to kill with this weapon. Outside of that, the Wave Cooker is a powerful tool for draining the health out of huge groups of smaller enemies. Now, it's time for the grenades. The first grenade is the Impact Axe, a throwable melee weapon. Enemies hit by the Impact Axe will take incredibly high damage. The axes also generate a small shockwave when hit. This is the best grenade for Driller, and killing things quickly is more important than anything else. Your next grenade is the Pheromone canister, a very interesting grenade that smears pheromones all over enemies caught in the splash radius. Enemies affected by pheromones will attack each other instead of you. This grenade gets a lot of value with huge swarms, or with a huge enemy on the field. Distracting them could save your lives. Your final grenade is the Neurotoxic grenade. When thrown, it'll release a cloud of deadly neurotoxic pesticide agent. Enemies caught in this cloud will suffer incredible damage and will quickly die in droves. Very effective for dealing with a group of lesser enemies without the use of your weapon ammo. And that does it for all 4 classes. That was quite a ride, wasn't it? As you have seen, we have only covered the baseline for all the classes. Lots of upgrades and overclocks have been modified, too many for us to reasonably cover anyway. And so that does it for your R&D weapon briefings. I have been the head of R&D. It was nice knowing you while it lasted. Now, if you excuse me, it's time to see you get back to work. Head of R&D out.